I cooked dinner for two. The plates were set neatly on the table, candles flickered, steam curled from the food I kept reheating every half hour. I glanced at the clock again and again, listening to the tick that grew louder with each passing minute. The hands crept toward midnight. And still the chair across from me sat empty. My phone lay silent on the counter. No messages. No missed calls. No excuses. By the time the clock struck 12, the candles had melted low. And the food had gone cold. I carried the plates to the sink, my chest heavy, my throat burning with the bitter taste of waiting. When I finally walked into the bedroom, the sheets were untouched. His side of the bed still smooth and cold. I lay down, staring into the darkness, my body tense, my mind racing. Where was he? Why hadn't he come home? The silence of the house gave me no answers. Only emptiness. And in that emptiness, one thought whispered louder than the rest. Maybe I wasn't waiting for him anymore. Maybe I was waiting for the truth. The next morning I sat at the kitchen table with untouched coffee, staring at the chair across from me. His bed was still cold, his shoes were still by the door, his jacket still on the hook. There was no sign that he had ever even walked through the door last night. I told myself maybe he had fallen asleep at work, maybe his phone had died, maybe there was some explanation that didn't hurt. But the explanations felt thin, like paper trying to hold back a flood. The hours dragged on. I checked my phone every few minutes, refreshing the screen, waiting for a text that never came. When I finally called, the line rang and rang before going dead. No voicemail. No answer. Just silence. By the second night I cooked again. Out of habit I set two plates on the table. Though I knew better. The food grew cold as I sat there, staring at the empty chair. At 10 I told myself he was late. At 11 I told myself maybe he was stuck. At midnight my chest ached with the truth I didn't want to say. He wasn't coming. Neighbors asked questions. Is he working late again? They said kindly. I forced a smile, nodding. Yes, just busy. But inside I was hollow. Days blurred into each other. I kept living on autopilot, keeping the house running, going to work, folding laundry, changing sheets that no one slept in. His side of the bed remained untouched, the blanket folded neatly like it had been waiting. The smell of him on the pillow grew fainter each day, until I pressed my face into it just to remember he had been real. By the end of the week, whispers began. His friends called, voices low. Have you seen him? He hasn't shown up. He won't answer us either. Each question stabbed at me. They didn't know where he was. And I didn't know where he was. And where was he? One evening, I opened the closet and stared at his clothes hanging neatly in place. His shoes still lined up, his favorite sweater still folded. Nothing missing. It didn't look like he had left. It looked like he had vanished. I sat on the floor of the closet, my hands clutching his shirt, rocking back and forth as tears spilled down my face. I whispered into the fabric, "Why didn't you come home? What did I do wrong?" Because that was the cruelest part. Every empty night, every untouched plate, every cold pillow whispered the same lie into my ears. This is your fault. He stayed away because of you. I tried to silence it, tried to remind myself I had done everything, cooked, waited, cared. But the longer the silence stretched, the heavier that lie became. Until it pressed against my ribs like a weight I couldn't lift. By the 10th night, I stopped setting the table for two. I stopped cooking meals that grew cold. I ate quietly, alone, staring at the empty chair. But no longer expecting it to be filled. The house felt different now. Not just empty, but hostile. The tick of the clock grew louder, the hum of the refrigerator sharper, the shadows longer. Every sound reminded me that I was alone, abandoned, left without explanation. But in that silence, something began to flicker inside me. Not hope. Not love. Something darker. If he wasn't coming home, then maybe it was time I stopped waiting. Maybe it was time I stopped blaming myself. Maybe it was time I faced the truth, whatever that truth was. Because his absence wasn't just neglect. It was a message. And sooner or later I would uncover it. By the second week, the silence had turned into a living thing. It followed me from room to room, whispering questions I couldn't answer. Where was he? Why hadn't he called? Why was his side of the bed still untouched, his shoes still by the door, his jacket still hanging neatly on the hook? I began to search for answers in places I never thought I would. I opened drawers I had never touched before, rifled through old papers, checked the glove compartment of his car. Everything was ordinary, normal, maddeningly so. There were no clues, no trail, no explanation for why the man who used to walk through the door at 6 every evening had simply vanished from my nights. Friends kept calling. He missed another meeting. We haven't heard from him in days. Is everything okay between you two? Their voices carried the question they didn't want to say out loud. Did he leave you? I told them no. I told them he was probably just busy. But even as I said the words, they tasted like ash on my tongue. On the 15th night, something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep waiting, couldn't keep sitting at the table staring at empty plates. I drove to his office, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. The building was dark. A security guard shook his head. No one's been here after hours for weeks. Weeks. I drove aimlessly after that, the city lights blurring through my tears. I checked the bars he used to go to with friends. I walked past the park bench where he once promised he'd never break my trust. No sign of him. No trace. When I finally returned home exhausted, I noticed something I had missed before. His phone charger was still plugged into the wall. His favorite watch sat on the nightstand. His wallet lay in the drawer untouched. If he had left, he hadn't packed. He hadn't even prepared. It didn't feel like he walked away. Felt like he disappeared. But then the whispers started, this time not from friends, but from neighbors. I overheard them outside, their voices low. Maybe he's with someone else. Maybe he wanted out. Maybe she drove him away. Each word struck like a hammer. I closed the window, sank to the floor, and pressed my hands over my ears. But the voices followed me inside, burrowing into my chest. Maybe he never planned to come back. Maybe he chose someone else over you. The thought gnawed at me, kept me awake long after midnight, staring at the cold sheets. My heart pounded with every creak of the house, every passing car. I imagined him somewhere else, smiling at someone else, eating dinner at another table while I sat here waiting. The breaking point came one stormy night. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rattled the walls. And still the house remained empty. I sat in the dark with a single lamp on, staring at the clock as it struck midnight. 15 nights. 15 cold beds. 15 unanswered questions. Something inside me hardened then. I realized I could keep tearing myself apart with questions, keep blaming myself, keep waiting for a man who had already chosen not to walk through that door. Or I could finally face the truth. He wasn't coming home. And whether he left by choice or by betrayal, his absence had spoken louder than any excuse ever could. The storm passed. But the silence inside the house lingered. The next morning I stood in the kitchen staring at 2 mugs, one empty, one untouched. It hit me like a wave. I had been setting a place for someone who no longer belonged here. For nights I had begged the walls for answers, searched for traces of him, clung to the hope that his footsteps would echo in the hall again. But the truth was simple and cruel. He had already chosen not to return. That afternoon I opened his closet. For weeks I had avoided it, too afraid of what I might find or not find. But now I pulled the doors wide and stared at the neat rows of shirts, the shoes lined up perfectly, the sweater folded still carrying the faint scent of him. For a moment grief nearly swallowed me whole. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, clutching that sweater like it could fill the hollow in my chest. But as I pressed my face into the fabric, another thought surfaced, a memory of all the nights I waited, all the meals I cooked, all the tears I shed while the clock struck midnight. Each time I told myself I wasn't enough. That maybe I had driven him away. That maybe my love had failed. And then in that closet I realized the truth. It wasn't my love that failed. It was his. If he had chosen another life, another person, another table to sit at while mine grew cold, that was his betrayal, not my failure. I stood up, sweater still in hand, and began packing. Not his things, mine. Clothes folded into a suitcase, The necklace my grandmother had given me tucked into a small pouch, photographs I couldn't bear to leave behind. Each item I placed in the bag was a piece of myself I was reclaiming. By evening, the house looked different. His things still sat in their places untouched, waiting for a return that would never come. But my side of the room was empty, the drawers bare, the suitcase standing by the door. Before I left, I walked through each room one last time. The kitchen where I had cooked dinners that grew cold. The living room where I had sat staring at the clock. The bedroom where his side of the bed stayed smooth and untouched. Each room whispered memories of waiting, of silence, of absence. But they no longer felt like chains. They felt like proof of what I had survived. I picked up my keys and stepped outside. The evening air was cool, crisp, alive. Behind me, the house stood in silence, its windows dark. I closed the door softly, the click echoing like the end of a chapter. As I walked down the street, my suitcase rolling behind me, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the life I thought I had, for the man I thought would always come home. Relief because I finally stopped waiting for someone who had already chosen to be gone. For weeks, I believed the cold sheets meant I wasn't enough. But tonight I understood. I wasn't the one who abandoned. I wasn't the one who vanished. I wasn't the one who left the bed cold. He never came home. And now I no longer needed him to.